Hello there, I'm Fintusius, and today we'll be reviewing the state of Windwalker monks in Shadowlands with information backed by better monk players than myself. Shout out to Lumsk for the PvE part and Waz for PvP. Before we get to the subject in question, I would like to greet every raid leader that is going to show you this video in hope of convincing you that Windwalker monks are fun and you should play one. As you've guessed it, the 5% raid debuff is still in the game and remains the main reason most raids composition would like to have a monk in the roster, which isn't a bad thing for you as a monk player, but still never feels nice. Let's start with the core changes. The Shadowlands Windwalker Monk is going to feel very similar to the BFA one, as most changes he received are additions to the toolkit and general flow he already had. There are, however, a couple of new toys you'll be receiving as a Windwalker. You are now once again able to use two-handers as your main weapon instead of forced dual wielding. This, however, offers, as of beta right now, no real change to your gameplay aside from the increased pool of items you can use, making it easier for you if you would like to respect to Brewmaster. As part of the AoE changes that are being applied across all classes and specs in Shadowlands, Windwalker's spinning crane kick is now capped at dealing damage to a maximum of 6 targets, while Fist of Fury, for some reason, has a max cap of 5. Expel Harm is now a baseline ability, which works in a similar way to the BFA PvP talent Reverse Harm. The main difference is that it now costs 15 energy, down from 40, has an increased rage to 8 instead of 5, at the cost of having a 50 seconds cooldown slap on top of it instead of 10, and sadly, no longer generates any chi. Another new baseline ability is Touch of Death.
Oh my god, babe, what? It's not new, what the fuck? Would I have that in BFA, you dumb fuck?
Please, let me talk. Touch of Death has been reverted to its Mist of Pandora design, which instantly kills creatures if they have a smaller max HP pool than you. When it comes to stronger monsters or other players, it instead deals an amount equal to 35% of your max HP at a now increased cooldown to 3 minutes instead of 2. Another noteworthy change is that the increased damage component from BFA has been removed, which means that the only thing increasing your touch damage is going to be your max HP pool. Additionally, it now also spawns 3 chi spheres, which grants you chi when you walk over them. Due to the way the ability works, what comes next should be of interest to you. Fortifying Brew is now a baseline ability on a 2-minute cooldown. It increases your max HP pool by 15% and also reduces damage taken by 15%. And yeah, you've guessed it, pairing it with Touch of Death will increase its damage. So if you didn't have enough of the so-called degenerate gameplay by using Touch of Karma offensively, you're now going to have double the fun by using a second defensive cooldown for DPS purposes while trying to get higher up in the meters and hopefully, well, not dying in the process. Another baseline ability you are getting is going to be Invoke Tyrael.
I'm sorry, did you say something?
Invoke Soon, yeah. Invoke Soon, which works the same as in BFA on a 2-minute cooldown with a 24-second duration instead of 20. This sadly leads us to the only talent change Monk received in Shadowlands as a beta, namely a BFA Azurite trait known as Dance of Chi-Ji, which has a chance at making your next spinning crane kick cost no chi and deal an additional 200% more damage. Whether it will be able to surpass the other talents in the row remains to be seen, but is a welcome addition nonetheless. When it comes to legendaries, keep in mind that you will only be able to equip one legendary effect at a time, but crafting another one shouldn't take longer than 1 or 2 resets. Since tuning is far from being final, there's no real point in making very specific rankings of them, but we'll still have a brief look. The Emperor's Capacitor is taken from a Legion legendary item, and is likely going to be the go-to choice for purely single target encounters as it was the case for Legion. Xuan's Battle Gear is an old Legion tier set bonus, only this time it has the benefit of synergizing greatly with the Kyrian Covenant ability, which we'll get to in a bit. It is likely it becomes stronger than the Emperor's Capacitor for single target oriented fights if you chose Kyrian as your Covenant, and is definitely strong for PvP as well, as it creates a small window of added burst damage. Rushing Tiger Palm could potentially be used in PvP as you can reliably make the bonus proc if you were to swap to a different target. With an added dash effect on top, even though Windwalkers don't exactly lack mobility, it makes it work like an additional roll, making it even harder for your enemies to run away from you. Lastly, we have Pressure Release, which has an interesting mechanic into the usage of Expel Harm. It is quite possibly going to be the best legendary for Mythic Plus dungeons, as in a time of AoE capped targets, this explosion having an uncapped amount can potentially be very strong for bigger AoE pulls. However, it's very much down to tuning. When it comes to PvP, you usually want to use Expel Harm as often as possible. But if the damage portion were to be extremely strong, it could potentially see play in 3v3 arenas in compositions such as Frost Death Knight and Windwalker Monk, as you could reliably have an on-demand big AoE hit for the inevitable 2-target cleave burst you are trying to set up. Conduits make up for another layer of endgame character progression, but since the general idea is that you are going to be able to pick and choose which one you want to use in your selected soulbind, it should come down to your preferred option. But yeah, let's not kid ourselves here, and what's likely going to happen is you're probably just going to use the ones that sim the best. As shown on screen, there are 3 categories of conduits. Potency ones are all about ability throughput, with one of the choices being a Covenant ability upgrade. The other 2 are Endurance, which is based around increased survivability, and Finesse, which stands for overall utility or movement increases. Keep in mind the amount of which type and how many conduits you will be able to use is tied to your selected soulbind talent tree, knowing that when it comes to potency conduits, you'll be able to have a maximum of 3 of them as a trade-off for less finesse conduits instead. Since Blizzard is most likely not going to change their minds about the possibility of changing Covenant abilities, you, as a player, are going to have to pick one and stick with it. I have created a tier list that could potentially help you in the decision-making process that revolves purely around the performance in all 3 respective types of endgame content, which are Mythic plus Dungeons, Arenas, and Raids, which we'll treat as more of a single target-oriented encounters. This tier list will have a point system on a scale of 1 to 4 in the respective content, as there are, well, 4 Covenants to choose from, and you will have to pair one against the other, resulting in a decision in the end. 1 point means likely the worst choice, while 4 means possibly the best one. Now, just a big disclaimer. Tuning isn't final and likely won't be even when the game releases. So please, don't murder me in the comments if something happens to change and Blizzard decides to buff an ability by 300%. I will surely make an update if that happens. First off, we have Kyrion's Weapons of Order, an ability on a 2-minute cooldown which increases your mastery by 15% for 30 seconds and additionally instantly resets your Rising Sun kick, and makes it reduce the cost of your chi abilities by 1 for 5 seconds after each kick. As mentioned before, it synergizes very well with Xuan's Battle Gear legendary effect, thus making it a top contender for raids and possibly PvP because of its reliable nature and burst potential. It shouldn't be too bad for Mythic Plus, especially when it comes to boss encounters, but other options are likely to pull ahead on overall data, making it less ideal there. Next up, we have Bone Dust Brew, the Necrold ability on a 1-minute cooldown which when used affects all targets struck and applies a buff for allies and debuff for enemies, which makes your abilities have a 15% chance to affect the target a second time at a reduced 25% effectiveness, whether it's damage or healing. On top of that, it also refunds 1 chi when striking affected targets with Spinning Crane Kick. With the ability only having 1-minute cooldown and being well rounded, I would put it as the best option for dungeons, as it should give very strong and consistent AoE damage. When it comes to raids, it would only work really well in encounters that have some cleave adds, but also wouldn't be too terrible if you were to only hit 1 target, so 2 points for that. For PvP, the low 15% chance of abilities affecting a second time is likely too inconsistent for it to be worth it, since in arenas, your uptime is generally not as high. However, if you were to play with the new Spinning Crane talent, it could remain viable in a 2-target burst cleave on a leg sweep combo. Following that, we have Feline Stomp from the Night Fae Covenant, an AoE hit with 30 yards of range and a 30-second cooldown. When used, it creates a pretty fancy Feline that lasts for 30 seconds on the ground and gives you a 10% chance per ability use while standing on it of resetting its cooldown. The best part, however, is that it rips out chi and energy spheres when used, so it gives you a whole lot of additional resources. Having said that, abundance of resources for Windwalkers aren't that powerful, as they more so rely on a healthy balance between their energy, chi, and cooldowns on abilities, thus making it pretty underwhelming for raids. For PvP, you will likely never be able to fight on a Feline, so it's definitely not a great choice in that type of content. When it comes to dungeons, it could potentially be pretty strong due to being able to do big AoE hits more often than every 30 seconds, but this ability, more so than others, is extremely tied to its tuning, which puts it in a place of being either really good or quite mediocre. Lastly, we have Fallen Order, which is a 3-minute cooldown that, contrary to popular belief, isn't from Coruscant but straight out of Revendreth. It summons random monk reflections every 1 second for 6 seconds each. Those reflections come in 3 possible versions, notably the tank, healing, and DPS ones. They help you by using respective abilities over those roles. The spawn order, however, is very random. You could technically only get, for example, healing ones if you were to be unlucky. Due to its versatility, it could potentially be pretty interesting and strong in both PvP and dungeons while being questionable for raids. Now that I've covered them all, you can have a quick look at the total points gathered by all choices, but again, do not take this as something set in stone, as nothing is final, and ultimately will come down to your own personal preferences and choice. Blizzard is trying really hard at making sure that no option is going to be the best one for everything, and that's with me not covering soulbinds and their combinations, as they are frankly impossible to cover due to the possibilities being almost endless. Overall, aside from some minor changes, Windwalkers will still feel similar at their core. Most of their new toys are new baseline abilities added into the toolkit, but ultimately will be pretty similar to BFA, especially when it comes to the talent tree, as it has sadly been left almost untouched. If anything, it's going to be a better version due to added depth and interactions thanks to the legendary powers, covenant abilities and conduits. If you liked playing Windwalker before, then you will possibly enjoy it even more in the new expansion, as they are in my opinion quite fun to play regardless of what the public opinion might state about them. Additionally, they still have the Mystic Touch physical debuff, leading to the popular obligation of having one token mark per raid group. I'll make sure to update the video before the game releases if the spec gets any additional major changes. If you enjoyed what you saw and would like to see videos similar to this one, feel free to leave me a sub and tell me in the comments which spec should I cover next. Goodbye.